It's December 29th, 1975. Huilo Kaplan sits opposite to David Bronstein in the Hastings International Chess Tournament. 25 moves have passed, he's nervous, apprehensive, and can feel the sheer Soviet power of Bronstein towering over him. Kaplan watches him drag his rook over to the center of the board, placing it on d8, where in tandem with the bishop on h6, he adds pressure to the rook on d2, which can't move without putting the king in danger, so Kaplan defends by sliding his rook across the first rank to d1. But this is a mistake. The very next move, he is placed in Zugzwang, the only kind of position in chess where the solution to his problems is impossible, because that solution would be to not make a move at all. And this is the history of chess's most impossible position, where being forced to move is the reason you lose. But why is it better to just not move? Why is having to move bad, you may ask? Well, what he begins to realize is that after Bronstein's next move c4, movement itself becomes the problem, and the conditions for Zugzwang have been met. c4 locks down white's two c-pawns. The king still can't move. It needs to defend the rook. Therefore, neither rook can move, as they're either pinned or stuck defending, so only his pawns are left. But moving his pawns solves nothing, and his pieces still end up being tied down the moment he runs out of pawns to move. If Kaplan hadn't have resigned after c4, the game would have ended just like this, where each pawn move only tightens the screws in his own coffin. If he moves the king, the rook loses a defender, and if he moves that rook, it also loses a defender. The theme with this game and every other example of achieving Zugzwang is that they all follow the same formula. They aim to restrict every move that the opponent has, but also they always happen in the endgame. This is because there are less pieces on the board, so therefore less variables to have to control, which leaves you wondering if anyone is genius enough to achieve Zugzwang earlier than the endgame. The very dramatic example I opened with is an example of partial Zugzwang, where the side about to get trapped has moves, so resigns in the face of the inevitable. On February 23rd, 1990, the legendary Garry Kasparov put a spin on this type of Zugzwang involving bishops and rooks and improves it. Nobody was surprised that he had achieved this, and it wasn't him doing it which is the most interesting, but it was how he done it. This time, opting instead to force his opponent, Artur Yusupov, to do something other than just move pawns. So after 56 painful moves, Artur finds himself struggling, down 2 points of material against the world champion in a position deemed -7 by chess engines. But a sliver of hope may exist in this kind of position, where with pawns on the same side of the board, they could just maybe be traded off, resulting in a draw. But Kasparov, being the genius that he is, saw this and instead saw something better: Zugzwang. He plays bishop d2, offering a rook trade that he knows Artur will avoid, as that would mean getting rid of his only major piece. In knowing this, he probably also saw Artur's snatch at hope, rook b2, attacking the bishop. But this is the last true move that he plays of the game, where after bishop f1 attacking the pawn on h3, checkmate is threatened, so white is forced to play rook h2, defending. Therefore, black can now encroach, completely unobstructed. Artur frustratingly resigns 6 moves later, after only moving his rook back and forwards. The game ends in true Zugzwang, where if white could skip turns forever, he would be fine. But unfortunately, he can't, and all the moves he has left lose. Again, a Zugzwang in the endgame. All these examples point towards a progression in quality as years go by. Kaplan in 1975, Kasparov in 1990, and even some great examples in the 2000s. So why is it then that the greatest ever example of Zugzwang was played in 1923, and how did it only end on move 25, as compared to Kasparov's 63 move marathon? At first, we believed that Zugzwang almost always happens in the endgame, but after seeing The Flash of Brilliance by Aaron Nimzowitsch played in 1923, it changes everything we know about Zugzwang. This is Nimzowitsch versus Samish, Copenhagen 1923, otherwise known as the immortal Zugzwang game. It begins with a fairly unsuspecting Queen's Indian defense. Samish and Nimzowitsch are world-class players, so they know what they're doing in a position like this. They both fianchetto their bishops and take aim at the 4 center squares of the board. A moment of slight confusion arrives when Samish shakily plays knight to e5, perhaps the first of a series of miscalculations. The point of this move is that Samish believes he can give his bishop room to breathe, therefore he can begin to prepare an e4 push in the center of the board. But Nimzowitsch says otherwise, and plays c6, which, as he said in his book, safeguards his position. Perhaps caught in the intricacies of his thoughts, White captures on d5, now eliminating any chance of playing e4 in the future. Nobody is losing yet, and the computer still gives zeros for this position, meaning that neither side has any particular advantage. But again, Samish takes a step in the apparent wrong direction. So Nimzowitsch introduces his ghosts, where the threat of them noiselessly trotting to the c4 square will haunt the rest of the game. Samish plays queen to b3, which, under the harsh light of the tournament hall, is exposed by Nimzowitsch, explaining that this move invites him to play knight c6, where knight to a5 is threatened. This would attack the queen, and therefore give him a free move to plant his ghost at the forefront of Samish's mind. He sees this. A bead of sweat rolls down his forehead. He tucks to himself and hurriedly gets rid of the ghost. He then plays h3 and king h2, placing his king on a safer square. Nice and secure, he must have thought to himself. Nimzowitsch uses his knight to kick away the dark squared bishop. Remember this bishop, it becomes important for later. He then backs this up with f5, halting e4 forever, and with a wry smile, he hopes to halt a lot more. Samish takes stock of his current position, and suddenly, the feeling of dread starts creeping over his shoulder. He's running out of moves. He hurriedly scans the board and locates Nimzowicz's undefended knight on h5, so he plays queen to d1, threatening e4, which would open an attack on the knight. Nimzowicz's eyes drift over to the left side of the board. He first attacks the white knight, kicking it back to its starting square, and looks again at his knight, currently under attack. He knows what he has to do. He completely abandons it. In his book, he writes that for this sacrifice, white loses 2 pawns, extinguishes control over the 7th rank, and now has a queenside that can't move. Samish's emerging panic is now in full effect. He scurries his king away, not quite as secure as he originally thought. His position is now one that has next to no good moves left, and it's still only the middle game. His only hope exists in the squares available to his queen, but he watches in horror as those squares too are instantly taken away. Dejected, Samish grabs his rook and yanks it to e1, a move that he knows achieves nothing. However painful it is to see, a wave of acceptance passes over him. The conditions for chess's most impossible position have just been met. He smiles in a way that clearly still stings. The greatest ever example of Zugzwang is finally complete, earlier than the endgame and different to how the world has seen it before, thanks to one tiny move that flicks the light off of White's entire position, the cherry on the cake. Not one of White's pieces can move without being captured or losing immediately to tactics, and yet tragically, if he was allowed to do nothing, he would survive.